She said she can't hear us or see us.
You should be able to see us now.
Jen, I'm getting messages asking if we can hear or see them. And I'm telling them no.
No.
I'm going to say we can hear and see each other.
So we can see you and we can hear you, but you're echoing in here when I talk.
Okay, well, I think anybody of the three of us who's not talking, we'll turn our mute on.
Perfect.
Jim, do you want to say a few things? You can be first up. I'm going to shut my mute on.
Yeah. I hope you can hear me just fine. Let me know if not, but I'm Jim Henke with David Evans and Associates, the consultant team project manager. How am I coming through?
You're perfect.
Oh my goodness.
Great. I'm getting an amazing echo though when you feedback to me, but I can hear you. It just has an echo. Would Carolyn or anyone else, would you like me to begin with the presentation, or do you want to have some opening words, Carolyn?
I don't think so. I think you can go ahead, Jen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I am going to share my screen, and let's see, can you see the title slide, Front Street Blueprint Planning Commission meeting number 2? Is that?
Yes.
Yes, great. Well, welcome everyone. We're here to discuss the Front Street Blueprint project and give you an update. This is our second meeting with the Planning Commission, and the first meeting focused on kind of site analysis and an overview, and this time around we're going to talk about some alternatives. But agenda-wise, we'll review the project purpose and the schedule, just very quickly give you a little update on community engagement activities. But the bulk of the meeting, we're going to focus on 2 alternatives and just kind of share the nuance between the 2 that we're looking at. And then we want to leave, the second half of the meeting for your discussion, your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps and what lies ahead for this project. So that's the overview of what we'd like to do tonight. If please let me know if I should slow down or if there's anything along the way, but it might be helpful to get through the presentation and then discuss it, but I'm flexible. So we are working with an advisory committee meeting, and we met with the advisory committee a couple weeks ago, and we shared a very similar presentation. I'm sure you know many of these folks listed on the committee, and I won't run through them unless, Carolyn, you think we should read off the names, or no? Okay, then I'll keep moving. But the team, the professional team, is kind of a collaboration between the city with Carolyn as your local project manager and your city engineer, Jennifer, and your consultant, transportation consultant, Kim Parducci. We've been having some communication with those 3 folks. And the project is funded by ODOT, and we've been working closely with their representative, Virginia Elant. I mentioned I'm Jim Henke with David Evans and Associates, project manager. My background is in planning, urban design, and landscape architecture. I've been working closely with Cameron Greil, our transportation lead, and he's a Coos Bay, grew up in Coos Bay, as well as another planner on our team, Gigi Cooper. But tonight with me, Alice Hodge from JLA Public Involvement. I don't know, Alice, if you want to say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Alice, in a few slides, Alice will give you a little bit of an update on the public involvement and engagement activities and how those are going. But another team member who's not with us tonight, Emily Pica of Eco Northwest, she worked on the Front Street Action Plan several years ago, and she'll be helping us as we move the plan towards implementation. All right, I mentioned the Front Street Action Plan, and the purpose of the Blueprint project is to advance what you adopted back in 2017. These things are in alignment, and they're just trying to move them forward towards implementation. So if you haven't familiarized yourself with the action plan, it's on the website, and we've included one of the diagrams from the report right here, and it shows you that in the action plan back in 2017, there was a vision of improving a north-south connection on Front Street, and then making some critical improvements to some east-west connections, as well as access to the water. And the idea that some sites might be ripe for redevelopment. So kind of a broad, comprehensive plan that we are now trying to take further towards implementation. And another activity that we wanted to recognize was the 2020 update to your transportation system plan. So that's kind of the foundation of our blueprint work. Just to review where we are in the process, we met with you back in May of 2021 when we had started looking at inventory and analyzing existing conditions, and that work is essentially complete. And we've spent the months in between creating these two alternatives, and we're really at the end of that process, but we need your feedback on them so that we can move to the next phase in the process, which is recommending a preferred design. So here we are, November of 2021. This is where we've been analyzing and creating alternatives, and looking ahead, we're going to start focusing on a preferred, and then hopefully getting that adopted as we head into the middle of next year. So just an overview of the schedule and the process. Now, the action plan identified some key objectives, and our work is taking those further, and there's 6 of them that we wanted to highlight. Number 1, bike and pedestrian safety. Number 2, access and intersection improvements in the study area. Number 3, wayfinding and public art. Number 4, pathways and overlooks to the water. Number 5, just generally circulation and connectivity. And number 6, parking management. Parking is always an important factor. So those are 6 objectives that the blueprint is addressing. So we've held 2 advisory committee meetings, as I mentioned, and we've done some survey work. And Alice, I'm wondering if you would like to jump in and maybe provide a little more detail about how you've been helping the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Alice Hodge. I'm a project lead at JLA Public Involvement in Portland. And we're assisting the city of Coos Bay, ODOT and DEA with their public outreach efforts for this project. So at this point of the process, we have about 3 ways of engaging with the community. So you saw Jim spoke a little bit about the advisory committee and provided the roster for that committee. And they've already met twice. You saw that on the schedule, that they met in April and September of this year. And then they'll meet 2 more times, most likely in early winter and then late spring of 2022. Then we, for the greater community, we have an online survey that's live right now, and it's going to remain open for public comment until December 12th, 2021. This is a great way to, if you have a friend who wasn't able to make this meeting, they can see a lot of this information in that survey. So you can learn more about the project. You can look at the design goals. You can also take a closer look at the designs, sort of the 2 design concepts for what transportation might look like on Front Street. We'll also ask you for your priorities for transportation. And if you have any other thoughts about this project, there's an open comment box, so you can provide those thoughts there. That is on our project website. It's Coos Bay Front Street Blueprint.org. I think you can probably find that on the city. It sounds like Carolyn's been sending that out through the weekly newsletter. And again, that's open for another month. So tell your friends, tell your family. It's a great way to get the word out about this project. And we really, really want that community feedback. When the survey is closed, I'll take all that information. I'm going to synthesize it and I will provide that back to the project team. And that'll really help them to make their kind of next level recommendations, and really want to make sure that what we are proceeding with meets the community's needs and desires. And then the final type of public outreach we're doing is called Stakeholder Interviews. So the city identifies some key folks in our community, and we wanted to make sure that we had one-on-one conversations with them. So over the last probably 6 months, we've spoke to about a half dozen people from the tribal partners, community members, business owners, and we've just had a kind of a list of standard questions, and we just wanted to hear from them kind of what they thought for themselves, for their business, for the organization that they're representing, and it just helps round out our engagement to make sure that we're hearing from everyone. And I'm sure that this will be included in a later slide, but we will continue to do outreach during this process. But if you have any questions or concerns or comments at any time, you can always email Carolyn about the project. So there's always ways to ask a question or provide input if the survey doesn't work for you or public meetings just can't work for you. I think that's about it.
Thanks, Alice. And
Yeah.
just to emphasize that point, Carolyn shared some emails and communication about the project that she just received, I think, today or this week. So the comments continue to come in about the project itself. We'll keep rolling. This is just a summary diagram of our analysis. It's pretty simplified. It's not really meant to be overly detailed, but we've been zooming in and looking at where parking exists along some of these frontages on the side streets, and we sort of expanded our view a little bit to look at how parking on Bayshore works. And then there's a lot of missing sidewalk in the study area. These green stripes here indicate missing sidewalk. We wanted to pay attention to where driveways exist because maintaining access to these businesses, of course, will be very important. And then where some locations for pedestrian crossings are likely to be important. So it's just a diagram to capture some of the analysis that we've been looking into, and it'll inform the alternatives, of course. You see these little symbols here where it says B, C, D. Well, those are street section locations where we went ahead and mocked up what conditions look like more or less today. And you can see here A, B, C, D, and E, and where they're located, north of Date, between Birch and Cedar, and also to Date, Alder to Birch, and Market to Alder. Just where people park, travel lanes, and of course the rail line right there in the center of the road. So we wanted to let you know that we started with, looking at your existing conditions before we dove into creating the alternatives. Now earlier I showed you the action plan diagram, as you recall, and it had some orange parcels and it had a yellow north-south bike ped connection identified. So fundamentally, the blueprint is an update to that diagram and it's a refinement. So you'll notice that this diagram has some more detail. It still has shaded some of those same opportunity sites. It's continued to call them out in the orange, and where the dock structures are located, which is something the action plan had identified. But again, here's where we've cut those street sections, A, B, C, D, and E. And then we wanted to, call out again that north-south boardwalk extension, and also show on these side streets where some pedestrian improvements and crosswalks might occur, as well as intersections that could stand to be enhanced. The red dots are a very first attempt at locating where either some wayfinding or gateway elements could occur. And then these yellow hatched spaces are where there was an indication of potential access to the water would be desirable. That was something from the action plan. The city is planning a parking lot right here in this bluish gray color, and that's going to come online in 2022. And then there's been some recent redevelopment. Some of that orange has already turned purple, where some activity has occurred in the study area, so we wanted to capture that. And of course, right down the middle of it all is the existing rail line. So overall, this diagram is something we're going to continue to refine, but you can see there's a little more nuance about where some pedestrian and landscape improvements might occur. There's been discussion of a future non-motorized boat launch right here near the museum on the north end. And then another factor to keep in mind is that for most of the corridor, two-way vehicular traffic is proposed to be maintained, but south of Alder, the proposal at the moment is that Front Street will become one-way north until you get to Alder. So we've indicated that with this arrow saying, okay, you come up here to the north, and then it becomes two-way traffic, but if you're heading south, you'll have to turn at Alder. You can't continue to the south. I'm going to keep going. We can come back to this, of course. So I mentioned two alternatives. Number one focuses on creating the best north-south multi-use path. And alternative number two prioritizes on-street parking. Just to give you kind of a quick orientation, and I'll walk you through how we're showing that. Here's those sections again, A, B, C, D, and E, again with their locations. And you'll notice how what used to be on-street parking on both sides of the street has been suggested as, well, let's go ahead and create a generous multi-use path and boardwalk on the north end. Really a beautiful, gracious space for people who want to walk, ride their bikes or scooters or stroll, and experience the water and kind of connecting to the north and the south. As you head south, Birch to Cedar and Date, you can see how the path continues. It's very wide. There's lots of room for circulation. Cars can continue to head north and south. You can park on the west side, but the parking on the east side in this scenario, has been transformed into a path. Heading further south, Alder to Birch and Cedar, you can see how through that part, the multi-use path continues. You still have vehicular traffic and on-street parking on one side. Here's a suggestion of how landscaping could occur or if there's some signage, and where the rail line is located sharing that lane. And then as you head all the way to the south, Market to Alder, the path continues. The travel lanes are 2 lanes north in this condition, and on-street parking with, again, some landscaping. We have a focus on those sections. If you'd like to discuss them in more detail, you can see how some streetscaping might occur with some decorative light fixtures. But it's more just to kind of, get feedback from you on, do you like this idea? Are we heading in the right direction? Or when I show you alternative 2, do you like that one better? But you can see the travel lane widths, the path widths, the sidewalk widths, and the right-of-way widths. Continuing south, here we are again, Cedar, Birch, Date, Alder to Birch, Cedar, and then Market to Alder. So that's the one we're calling the multi-use path emphasis, and it's alternative number 1. Alternative number 2, as I mentioned, it prioritizes on-street parking on both east and west sides of Front Street. So how does that look? On the north end, you can see here's the parking, but you have a narrower boardwalk. That's the trade-off. And as you travel south, again, it's constrained by the width, and there's only so much you can fit into a 60-foot right-of-way, so the path is more narrow. It's just a sidewalk. There's parking. And we've shown that bikes might have to share the street with the traffic. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. That's very hazardous, potentially. Just want to call that out, that anything that doesn't get the bikes away from these the railroad tracks and the flanges where you can get your wheels caught is a hazard. So we really want to call your attention to, we're not so sure that's the best idea for bicycles in particular. So anyway, here's the parking on both sides and the travel lanes and the rail line, but the narrower path. Here we are going south. It's a little narrower. We showed a little different light fixture just for fun to show you that there's some options there. And there's some options too about whether the sidewalk is right up against the curb and then the landscaping is behind it, or if the landscaping comes closer to the curb. You may have seen that in a few of these sections, and we wanted to illustrate that there's some options there. Traveling further south, but as you get all the way to the south end, there is enough room, and again, because it's one way north to Alder, that we could capture the wide multi-use path for that segment of this alternative. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. So that's just kind of like an introduction to the 2 ideas, and I wanted to share with you some of the analysis that we've begun, kind of the criteria we're looking at, and we're also asking the community to help us evaluate the 2 alternatives. So Alice, on the online survey, I believe we have these 7 criteria mentioned: access and mobility, corridor safety, encourages private investment, minimizing cost and implementation complexity, supporting land uses, vibrancy and flexibility, whether or not it supports parking, and then just generally, do we think this is good for the environment or district resiliency? And we've asked folks to prioritize those. You know, do they think one of these 7 is more important than any of the others, and try to get the feedback about a variety of factors, because the plan is intended to be comprehensive and not limited to any one criteria. So that's something that's in process, and we're already starting to ask ourselves, do these alternatives meet the criteria, yes or no? There's additional criteria we'll have to look at, though, as we move forward, and one of those factors is from the rail line itself. There's some very specific technical requirements about clearances to rail lines, and this diagram from the Oregon Department of Transportation illustrates what some of those clearances need to be. So that's another important factor that we'll have to consider with any alternative as we move it forward. And I mentioned parking, and we've already had some feedback from the advisory committee saying, please tell us more about parking. And one of the things that we've added to our analysis is what's happening along the curb of Bayshore Drive. Because in an earlier analysis, we had not counted that up. So this exhibit, we wanted to wrap our head around, well, in the study area today, how many parking spaces do we have generally? And so we looked at the east side of Front Street, the west side of Front Street, we looked at the side streets, and we looked at the east side of Bayshore. And we kind of, this was sort of a planner level study. We were estimating that we have about 154 to 158 total spaces in the study area today. So looking ahead, we wanted to understand with alternative number 1 and alternative number 2, how will that change the parking? So you can see, again, we looked at the east side, the west side, the side streets in Bayshore, but guess what? There's going to be a new city parking lot that comes online in 2022, and that's going to provide 40 to 45 spaces that don't exist today. So we wanted to make sure we didn't forget about that. And then by angling parking south of Alder, which we've shown in both alternatives, there are a few spaces we can capture through that design idea. So just to sort of give you a snapshot, we think that alternative number 1, it's pretty close to maintaining what we have today. There is a chance we could lose a few spaces, about 6. But we also think that if we sharpen our pencil, we may actually be able to come out ahead with 31 extra spaces than what exists today. So that felt pretty good. And then alternative number 2, the parking priority, well, this in our analysis generally increases the amount of parking in the study area by about 50 spaces, up to 55. So just to give you a little bit more feedback and answer your questions about what does this do to parking? Well, number 1 is pretty close to maintaining what you have, perhaps a little less, perhaps somewhat more. And number 2 is quite a bit more than what you have today. Part of our scope of work in the next phase is that the consultant, based on your input, we're going to come back to you with our recommended alternative. And we've already taken a pass at kind of a quick analysis based on, again, the general criteria. And at the moment, we're leaning towards alternative number 1 because we think it meets the criteria better, but the couple of criteria it may not meet quite as well. Of course, when you talk about parking, number 2 is better, has more parking, and potentially is a little less complicated, perhaps, than number one. So this was just the consultant's first pass at what works really well, what's fair, and what's poor. The poor rating here for number two, again, reflects that for bicyclists, number two is not very good.
I have a
So
question.
that's the bulk of the presentation, giving you the overview, and we really wanted to save time to get your questions and see if you wanted to discuss any aspects of what we've shown tonight in more detail.
I have a question. So what's the answer? Question was, we use diagonal parking in number one, is that a possibility? And have it just on one side? How does that I think that, well, I don't know. In North End, we use a lot of diagonal parking, it's quite nice. And it eliminates the need to try to parallel park. But I'm just wondering here, I mean, to me, it seems like alternative one makes sense, it's nice to have a broad pathway. And, but, you know, that we're only going to park in one direction. Maybe that's okay. I just asked a question about the numbers of places that would generate.
Well,
Hear his question?
with the echo, it's challenging to pick up every word. It sounds like this question's about parking. And I'm wondering if we might be able to employ the use of the chat function and write some questions, if that's possible in the Planning Commission. I'm getting a lot of feedback. How about Carolyn and Alice? Are you getting feedback too? Yeah.
I don't think this is going to work. Sure. What do you want me to say?
Yeah, it turns into a lot of echoing. I can kind of hear you. If you want to keep trying to, maybe somebody who is closest to the microphone could relay the questions if they speak slowly.
Well, we all have a microphone.
We've not had this happen before, but yeah, that's probably.
I speak very clearly.
Not hearing anything at the moment. It sounds like mute is on.
If you want to wait, I'm going to call IT.
Okay. Yep, I can wait. And yeah, let us know. We could send you a Zoom link or something if we want to try some alternatives too.
What if I just text Carolyn what we're asking? Can she type it in?
That'd be tough.
I mean, we can.
I think it's just, we need to do it.
What was Jim's question?
Jim, was your question about diagonal parking, how many it adds?
I was just wondering if they had diagonal parking instead of on trying to do it on both sides, would that add or subtract? It's just a thought. think, we're gonna wear ourselves out with this.
Yeah, we are.
Maybe if we can kind of come to some agreement on alternative 1 or 2, and just one person talk to that alternative.
Or maybe we just discuss it and then they can read the comments and be on the because obviously they're not gonna hear us and we're not
Yeah,
gonna.
we could go on to public comments probably.
The sound has gotten a little better. I don't know if you've done something, but it is a little, we can hear you at the moment.
Do you want to try talking without getting close to your mic?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, well, my question was simple and isn't that, I was asking about the concept of using parallel or diagonal parking on one side of the street, an alternative 1, to, and how would that affect the number of parking places? Or, and that's not an easy answer, but anyway, that's just a thought.
Yeah. We showed in both options that south of Alder, there's the opportunity to create some angled parking. Oh, and there could be other locations, I think, if we looked at traffic flow, we'd have to kind of weigh that because, as we mentioned, it's one way being proposed from Market to Alder, and that creates the opportunity for angled, which you can squeeze in a few more spaces sort of in that longitudinal direction. So that does provide a potential benefit, but I think once we hit the two-way segments, it could create some problems for us, and that's why we were showing just parallel in the current alternatives.
Well, it seems to me we sometimes waste a lot of space in parallel parking. I mean, around town, there's places where they have more yellow lines between cars than you really need, and other places where they, it's just that, and I think the relative skill of people using parallel parking is a mixed bag, whereas it might diagonal parking on one side, do it on the side that doesn't face the boardwalk, so you have a nice clear view from that. It would only provide it for one side of the street, but anyway, it's just a thought.
No, that's a great comment, and I think your point about the boardwalk, perhaps the north end, the right-of-way opens up a little wider, so that's something we might be able to look at if we could tuck in some angled parking on the north end, if we can't squeeze it in the middle where it's a little more constrained.
Yeah, I think as you move through the progress through the project, there's sort of places where one might lend itself better than another, and anyway, that was just my thought. Otherwise, it's all very attractive, and I guess the thing is the railroad is always going to be an interesting project where, normally you've got all kinds of bells and whistles and everything else to cross the railroad tracks. Here you're sharing them with the train, so I guess depending on the amount of rail traffic we have, which probably is never going to be huge, that's probably the reason it might work.
Just a question with regard to the opportunity sites. Did the city or anybody spend some time talking to the property owners that are identified as opportunity sites?
Well, couple of comments related to that. The opportunity sites in the Front Street Action Plan, I believe that plan included quite a bit of outreach and interaction with a variety of the public and stakeholders and property owners. I wasn't involved in the action plan, so I don't know for sure, but I assume there was some at that time. And then with this process, on the advisory committee, there's some business owners in the study area, and they've been involved. So Yes, I believe we are talking to the property owners. And Carolyn, I don't know if you want to jump in on that one?
Well, I think you've summarized it fairly well. Two property owners are on the advisory committee, and maybe what we could do is kind of go back to them because they were there during the action plan work, and just confirm what we understand and ask them for any thoughts they might have on property owners that where hands may have changed, things like that, that we could connect and get them involved.
That's probably a good idea. Rex and I also were talking about the city's access to the water, the right-of-ways today. And I'm sure Rex has something to say about that, but we think that's a really important aspect of this development here. However, two of these access points are currently extend into what looks like private property and is not private property, but close to the tugboats and also by the Knutson industrial yards there. There's two others that are not impacted, but if the city can provide access out to the water, the public will come. And I'm totally in favor of alternative one. If it's just an ideal situation for people on bikes, which there are very few, but simply pedestrians traveling up and down the streets like on the Coos Bay Boardwalk. It would tie in with the new Coos Bay Village. I doubt seriously that parking's going to be a major issue until we get some serious development on Front Street. And then that's a good thing, i.e. Newport.
Yeah, it's a busy waterfront, and parking can be challenging because people really want to be there.
Well, I guess if I was going to make a comment or a couple of comments here, back in May, I suggested that one takes a look at Front Street from the water, and if you didn't take a boat down and look at Front Street, I don't think we got the site analysis we really should have. There's some pretty neat stuff there. You know, you've got the Sauces ocean going tugs. You've got Sweets building that the whole thing is about to go into the bay because it's been undermined with the tides, which is, I find really pretty cool. And then there's some other things there. The ironworks, the great big piles of iron. Have anybody ever looked at that? I mean, that's years of filings. They're a big stalagmite out there at the end of the building. Anyway, those things I think all are really important. It's a little different than the streetscape, I understand that. But and another thing about the rail, have you checked into the spurs? I was planting a plant down there well off the right of way, and ran into a chunk of rail 2 foot down to the ground. So anyway, come to find out, there's a deed for that rail. Those spurs are deeded, and if they feel like using it, that's their property. I think it would be really important. Callison's had a whole rail line go in there. Anyway, it's 2 foot under the ground, but it's still theirs. It still belongs to them. And the other, I'm just kind of throwing out some thoughts here, but the other thing that I'm really having trouble with this, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful design, and I think you've done a very nice job on it. But, you know, we can see bike paths and landscaping and corridors like this in any major city, but what they don't have is the waterfront, and that's the key here. And there's really no anchor in that area. I mean, I have the privilege of working at Bay Village and also on the landscapes of these buildings that have been converted into to new uses. And there's a big difference. I mean, you're walking down Bay Village and you got a cup of coffee in your hand or an ice cream cone and it says tourist, tourist, tourist. You drive down Front Street and it's industrial, it's heavy trucks, it's water related, which I think is really good and that needs to be brought out. But I don't really know how this fits in that area. And maybe it will, but without an anchor there, I was telling Jeff, I said, you know, probably the best anchor they ever would have had was the old Taco Time at the end, because that would draw people in. And you'd use it. People do walk that direction, but and anyway, I would really like to see you take a look at Front Street from the water side. And other than that, I think alternate one I think is a very good choice.
Rex, if I could make a comment. When we take this on to council, we'll definitely bring up that idea of looking at it from the water side. That wasn't in the scope of work that ODOT funded, but I think it's a pretty unique and interesting idea that has some merit, and we'll make sure that comment gets into the record.
Is there,
And
Josh Stevens here, is there consideration in either of these any of these plans for public restrooms, things like that, especially if we're doing a small kayak paddleboard launch site? Is that?
that's not in the scope of work or the action plan either. I don't remember seeing that in the action plan. However, there are other projects related to the museum. They ultimately want to put in something behind the museum that perhaps could include restrooms. I think when we had our public meetings a year and a half ago, before we brought on our consultants to do work on the parking lot that Jim pointed out to you, the community that came out, there were probably 15 people showed up on site and said, we really hope you don't put restrooms down here or benches where people are sleeping and, trying to live here. Evidently, that's been kind of an issue for a lot of the businesses down there. So anyway, that's the feedback we've had so far.
I guess one question I have is, and I can't see it from these plans, but I'm sure you thought of it, maybe better you illustrate on that one, but in terms of the actual linkage of this bit to both ends, because it seems like on either end of the old Front Street is where most of the real business and stuff is taking place, and how inviting is it to go walking from the boardwalk into Front Street and on over and into the museum and the Coos Bay Village? How are those walkways connected, and how handy and easy and comfortable is that for a person making that little trip?
That pinch point is there behind the museum, right, Jim? That's where we begin to shift into the much, we're headed to Coos Bay Village.
Right.
So I think that's the question.
And then on this end, in front of the Sauce Brothers there, I mean, I guess, to make that so it feels like a continuous walk, and you're not walking from something to something else, but the whole thing really seems to me should feel like one walkway to from the end of the other end of the boardwalk to the end of Coos Bay Village.
Yeah, if I understand the question, I think it gets right to the heart of, the ability to make that seamless connection ought to be as easy and inviting as possible. And we absolutely agree. And As we move into the preferred alternative, the challenge is block by block. The conditions change. Sometimes there's the way somebody's parking lot is oriented. We might have to study how to get people across that safely and make sure it's clear. And then where there's driveways, how does the walkway engage with that? Those potential right-of-way connections to the water, is there curb ramps or how is that handled? Those are the kinds of details that we want to try to dive into a bit and illustrate so that we have a better understanding about what it's going to take to physically make that connection in a safe way. So we're excited to kind of get to that next phase because right now we're trying to just get in the ballpark of, well, do you like this idea or that idea? And once we start focusing on one idea, I think we can start to zoom in a little bit and show how specifically the connection can be made.
Is there any further comment? Questions? Do you guys have anything?
No, I have no comment or question at this time.
I think alternative one is definitely more aesthetically appealing. I also think the gooseneck lighting kind of matches the waterfront heritage district a little bit better than the, I guess I don't know what to call that, kind of the triangle lighting.
We called it more contemporary, the other alternative, but we thought folks would like the more traditional look because you already have fixtures kind of like that in the area, and we thought we could, in one alternative, show how those could be continued.
Sure, which I think is great. Do I open for public comment at this point, or did you guys have? Yeah, is there any public comment? Okay, go ahead.
Jim Barron's, Fulton Street, Coos Bay. The rail line guys, and Mr. Miller pointed out that there's probably a few spurs and right-of-ways floating around down there. When's the last time they did the ballast and ties underneath that pavement? Is it going to have to be all reworked? In other words, we're going to put sidewalks and parking lots and encourage business to come down there that's just going to open up, and then we're going to tear the street up. So that has to be looked at. Car count. Worst case, about 50 a day when timber was going on that line? About that, Mr. Berg, you would have remembered that.
Gosh, I forgot to count. No, but it would have been made to be a train a day or something, but certainly it's not, I don't believe.
Well, we have an intermodal thing going in at GP, and we don't even know how many cars yet. Could be 50 a day, just like the good old days. Could be 100 a day, and that changes that dynamic. Some of my friends in small business support alternative 2, which is the parking. And the reason for that is we have some local catalyst right now. We have local people putting money into that area. We have a lot of local ownership. It's not out of the area ownership, okay? But it's going to be a slow growth. I don't think it's going to be a big pop. I don't see a big developer coming in here and buying all that, mostly because I don't think people are going to sell it, all right? So you're looking at 20 years, my gut, before that has any depth to it. The other thing, which isn't involved because this is transportation, that's who paid for this plan, is what sort of controls are you going to have on the people that develop on the bay side of that road? Are you going to require them to put walkways around their buildings so that you have that bay vista? All right. Ever since I've been here, which is 20 years, we're going to put a boat launch down there for kayaks. I've heard it for 20 years. It's never happened. There is a place or two it can be done, but it needs to be tied in there, and it needs to have parking. The final thing, which has come up quite a bit, is down here on 101, on the opposite end of town from Front Street, is Curtis, which is a two-way street that leads back to a huge parking lot. You're going to put all this development down there, Coos Bay Village, the Front Street, the museum. Who's going to be able to park a trailer or RV down there? Nothing. I suggest that one of the things be considered, and I'm just thinking, is that we work at making Curtis a one-way, going toward 4th, and change the dynamic in that parking lot that FCR uses and try to accommodate some RVs and some trailer traffic. Most of that traffic drives right by us, okay? A lot of it parks in gravel parking lots abandoned because that's where they can find places to park, okay? And once you set that up, that group of travelers will spread the word. You'll get some RV stuff. Our travel and visitors people are pretty good. They'll get the articles in the right magazines and talk about that with a tie-in to the trolley system, okay? And shuttle them through that. That's something to think about when you're looking at all this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name's Eric. I was on the committee, one of the property owners on Front Street. My wife and I purchased that old, what was originally, it was VFW Hall. Anyways, I think it might still be orange on the map, but regardless, as has been well pointed out already by Jim, Hankey, and I think probably a pretty clear recognition, alternative 2 is going to be a real problem. You're not going to have, you're going to have to put a paramedic station down there if you want to go with alternative 2, because you're going to have people taking headers all the time. And I would like to respectfully contest the idea, Commissioner Marino said that there's very few bicycles on Front Street. There actually are quite a few, and there could be more if opportunities are there. So thank you for allowing me to just contest that. The other point I wanted to say is, and I think this might be just a little outside the scope of the project, is that I've always been kind of harping on this idea that access to Front Street from downtown is really important. In other words, crossing 101 right now is a gambit. You're crossing that highway, whether you're on foot or you're on bike or whatever, there's no crosswalks anywhere from the main crossing there downtown on, you know, where you cross to the boardwalk, all the way over to the new intersection. There's not a, I mean, on the southbound side there is, but not on Bay Shore on the northbound side. So that's something for the Planning Commission maybe to think about. I know that's a state highway, so maybe that's a little complicated for the city, but regardless, it's important. And I wanted to say, I think that the new parking lot that's being proposed and is going to be completed soon, which is right across the street from our building there, I think that they did consider putting bathrooms in there. And as somebody, I don't know your name, but as somebody said, I think that, or maybe it was Carolyn said that, I think that there was objections to that, and so I'm not sure how thought out that is. I don't know if anybody can answer that question actually. Are bathrooms planned for that new parking lot? So that's a question I have for anybody who might know. I don't know if Carolyn knows.
Yeah, at this time, I don't believe that they are. We're going to be working on that design based on the feedback we got from the community, I don't believe that a restroom was included.
Right. And I think that's all I had for comments on this. I mean, clearly, I think alternative one, I know that there had to be alternatives proposed here, but yeah, well, anyways, so thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Did you have something to say? No? Anybody further? Oh, I was just asking the gals behind you if they... What about commission comments? Any additional?
Just a comment regarding the bicycles. Alternative one should allow for thousands of bicycles on Front Street if they come. That would be great.
Is there staff comment? No?
We're good.
Okay. How about administrative and future matters for discussion, Carolyn? Anything?
Yes, I'm looking towards a December Planning Commission meeting on the 14th for you to complete your discussion on the vacation rental matter. And that's all.
Okay. You said December 14th?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if that's it, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you,
Yes.
Alice.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Emailing you, Jim. Bye-bye. Bye, Alice.
Okay. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Have a great night.
Thank you, Carrie. Good night, everybody.
I guess I'll have to put both water and send it down here.
I can send lots of photos.
Oh, you know, that would be helpful.